When I was younger, nothing unsettled me like our attic. There was something about that space that disturbed me more than the basement ever could. It was surprisingly spacious. You could stand upright without crouching. Most attics are cramped, but this one was different. Yet my parents treated it as nothing but storage, avoiding it constantly. The layout was fractured by irregular beams and uneven flooring, creating a maze-like space. The beams varied in thickness with no logical pattern. You couldn't see clearly from one end to the other. The floor was dangerous. You could seriously injure yourself. My father joked one of us would crash through the ceiling eventually. That terrified me as a kid. I hated not being able to view the entire space. I felt certain someone was hiding behind those beams. This happened so long ago, I barely remember that period. Yet this memory remains crystal clear, a disturbing scar on an otherwise wonderful childhood. I was in middle school. One morning, I woke and noticed my feet were grimy. Gray dust covered them. With grit between my toes, I couldn't explain. I hadn't been outside. I'd simply gone to bed and woken with filthy feet. As a kid, I didn't think much of it. I washed them and went about my day. Then things escalated. Days later, I found a cardboard box in my room containing old photographs my parents kept upstairs. I had no memory of bringing it down. My mother assumed I'd been exploring, but I denied it. She took the box back upstairs without concern. Then I found an old brass lamp on my desk, something from the attic. I was certain I hadn't brought it down. I would have remembered carrying a lamp through my house at night. That's when realization hit. The dirty feet, the photo box, the lamp. I wasn't just sleepwalking. I was sleepwalking to the attic. I didn't feel immediately terrified, but the thought was deeply unsettling. Navigating that chaotic space in complete darkness without awareness was disturbing. I told my parents, and they reacted predictably. They said sleepwalking was normal. That many kids experience it, and I'd likely outgrow it. They weren't dismissive, but they weren't alarmed either. But for me, it was significant. After the next incident, bedtime became something I dreaded. I'd stay awake for hours, terrified of what might happen when I lost consciousness. Every morning I'd check my feet. Clean meant good. Dirty meant bad. Usually they were clean, but those instances when they weren't really bothered me. I knew I was regularly visiting the attic, and the worst part was having absolutely no memory of it. I could have been spending more time up there than in my bed. The anxiety was unlike anything I'd experienced. It was persistent, creeping dread that never truly disappeared. But nothing matched what happened next. I woke one night in pitch-black darkness. Within moments, I realized I wasn't in bed. I wasn't even lying down. I was standing upright. I was standing in absolute darkness, with no idea where I was. My brain struggled to process it, then recognition crashed down on me. I was in the attic. The panic was overwhelming. I could barely breathe. I was surrounded by complete darkness. I couldn't see the beams, boxes, or hatch. Nothing. Just impenetrable blackness. Having no idea where in the attic I was made it worse. I remained frozen, too terrified to move. It was like sleep paralysis amplified 100-fold. Obstacles were scattered everywhere. Finding the hatch in total darkness felt nearly impossible, but I couldn't stand there forever. So I began moving slowly, with enormous trepidation. My terror was so intense I began crying silently. Tears streamed down my face, and I was convinced any loud noise would bring something down on me. I'd never felt such profound fear. Yet simultaneously, I felt certain I wasn't alone. something else occupied that darkness with me. Something further back. The moment I thought that, I heard it. A dull thud from somewhere behind me. It sounded like a footstep or weight shifting on the floorboards. I kept moving, and I heard that sound twice more, each time from seemingly different locations. I was absolutely certain something shared that attic with me. I don't know how long it took, but I eventually found the hatch. I went straight to my parents' bedroom and woke them. I was sobbing uncontrollably. I recounted what happened, describing navigating the darkness back. I told them about those sounds and that something was in the attic. I expected my dad to grab a baseball bat and charge upstairs. He didn't. They didn't take me seriously. My mom just hugged me and said sleepwalking was scary, but not dangerous. My father offered to lock the attic hatch, and I agreed. I knew what I heard. I pressured them to investigate, and my dad eventually complied. As he climbed up, part of me genuinely thought he wouldn't return, but within 2 minutes he was back down. He said there was nothing up there and told me to go back to sleep. That was the worst night of my life. After that, the sleepwalking stopped. I've never fully accepted the sleepwalking explanation. Sleepwalking is real, and there's nothing supernatural about it. But something in me can't let it rest. The way I always ended up in the same place. The attic, nowhere else. The way I apparently navigated that maze in complete darkness without injury. Most significantly, that night I woke standing in the dark. Those sounds I heard. I still believe something was up there with me. What it was, I haven't any idea. I've asked my parents repeatedly over the years, but they dismiss it. It's like they don't want to think about it either. I'll probably never get the answer I'm looking for. This happened when I was 14 or 15. My family lived in an ancient dwelling passed down for generations. My father grew up there, as did his parents before him. Like most homes, it had an attic. It functioned as a repository for unwanted items, furniture, boxes, holiday decorations. That last category was why anyone ever went up there. Once yearly before holidays, then again to restore everything. That particular Christmas, my father decided I was old enough to retrieve the decorations myself. He gave me detailed instructions about which boxes to find, mentioned lights being in a separate container toward the rear, and I nodded as though listening. I wasn't. I was thinking about something else. He sent me up to the attic. I climbed the ladder and pulled the hanging cord to illuminate the space. I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd been there. Then I recognized the problem. I had absolutely no recollection of his actual instructions. I couldn't remember anything he'd said, and I wasn't returning to ask him to repeat himself. My father got genuinely angry if you forced him to repeat something. So I simply opened random boxes that appeared to contain holiday decorations. I rummaged for roughly 20 minutes, creating total chaos. I eventually found the decorations, preventing me from trudging back empty-handed. However, the attic was now completely disorganized. I made roughly 5 trips down the ladder, transporting everything to the living room. When finished, I went back up for a final check. As I examined the area, I noticed something that seemed entirely out of place. In one of the rear corners, partially hidden beneath the items I'd shifted, there was a box I hadn't seen before. It was black and definitely not a flimsy cardboard container, but something substantially stronger, resembling a document case or fireproof storage box. Despite its sturdy appearance, it somehow looked more aged than everything else up there. Being an inquisitive adolescent, I naturally opened it. The interior contained papers, dozens upon dozens of them. Notebooks, individual sheets, hand-sketched diagrams, even pages that resembled musical notation. What they all shared was that every surface was completely filled with handwriting. I started examining it, attempting to comprehend what I was observing. The handwriting was initially challenging to read, but as my vision adjusted, I began understanding. None had dates, though they seemed organized chronologically, with older material on top and recent entries near the bottom. I was so fascinated that I promised myself I wouldn't go downstairs until I'd examined each page. The earliest entries were mundane: weather, household tasks, daily reflections. It resembled an unstructured journal. I rapidly determined that whoever authored this had formerly inhabited that residence. As I continued reading, the narrative became increasingly peculiar. The handwriting grew steadily more frantic and less legible, which was an early indication. But that paled compared to what was documented. Whoever wrote it all had become fixated with the attic itself. They kept calculating its dimensions. They repeatedly documented the measurements, comparing them with the residence's interior footprint. Based on their calculations, the attic was substantially smaller than expected. There appeared to be a section along one wall, several feet, that couldn't be reconciled with measurements. They devoted tremendous attention to describing every feature of that wall, cataloging every minute characteristic. Subsequent entries grew increasingly intense and disordered. From what I gathered, whoever wrote them was expending whole stretches of time in the attic, periodically sleeping there. They reported perceiving sounds from within that hidden cavity: scratching, breathing, similar occurrences. Certain entries included precise timestamps, such as 2:14 a.m., scratching lasting approximately 3 minutes. The deeper I delved, the more I comprehended that I was reading a first-person documentation of someone's psychological deterioration. The material became progressively incoherent. The concluding sheets consisted of nothing but tallies, rows and rows of them, monitoring something I couldn't determine. Then the documentation simply stopped. By the time I'd finished reading, I was physically trembling. I wanted to return everything and forget I'd encountered those documents, but I needed to do one thing first. My attention fixed on that particular wall the writer had become so preoccupied with. When I noticed it actually contained certain distinguishing characteristics, I felt physically unwell. I studied the wall more carefully, and the indentations and fractures appeared to align almost precisely with what that person had described. I can characterize it as being observed from multiple distinct vantage points simultaneously. I could visualize that individual violently gouging that wall in psychotic frenzy. Abruptly, I wanted out. I seized the black container and went directly to my father. He appeared equally shocked. He assured me he had no knowledge of it and had definitely never encountered it. He stated with certainty that the handwriting wasn't his father's, implying whoever wrote this must have inhabited the residence prior to my grandfather. His parents had both passed away, and he possessed no information about the prior inhabitants. My father decided to examine it himself and surprisingly brought me along. I felt safer having him there. I positioned myself to the side as he carefully analyzed that wall, utilizing the documentation as reference. After several moments, he became still as though contemplating something. He turned to me and announced he was going to demolish that wall. I was genuinely astonished, but I wasn't in any position to contest it. That's exactly what he did. Using equipment from the garage, he systematically took apart that wall. The revelation was absolutely startling. That author had been accurate. There genuinely was concealed space back there. Considerable space. It extended several feet deep and stretched along the complete length of the wall. But that wasn't even the most disturbing part. The surfaces of this hidden chamber were completely blanketed in markings. Dark pigmentation, geometric shapes, symbols I couldn't interpret. Nearly every square inch was covered. Those markings represented something completely different. They didn't resemble written language. But the implication was far more troubling. That hidden space possessed absolutely no secondary access point. So how had anyone ever entered that chamber? My father and I remained there, completely overwhelmed. Eventually, once the shock subsided, we examined the chamber thoroughly. There wasn't anything. That sealed room contained nothing, except for whatever had been drawn across its surfaces. The situation grew progressively more confounding. My father eventually made an observation. Whoever authored those documents with such meticulous attention to detail definitely didn't seem like the personality type who would then neatly compile everything in an organized container and conceal it away. That observation hadn't crossed my mind previously, but I conceded he had a valid point. That implied something completely different. Someone else must have assembled that archive. My father was already ahead in his reasoning. I watched a complicated expression, combining sorrow and bewilderment, come over his features. He paused, then proposed that his father, my grandfather, must have done it. He must have encountered these writings, assembled them, and put them inside that box. There wasn't anything further to accomplish. My father disclosed years afterward that his father's decision to conceal something like that would trouble him indefinitely, and I genuinely understand why. As for me, I'm uncertain what conclusion to draw. Such a long span has passed that I don't think it matters anymore. Yet if I contemplate it for extended periods, I can still terrify myself. I don't imagine anyone could make rational sense of it. There's no logical explanation. I theorize that whoever created those documents was identical to whoever gouged that hidden chamber, and they were likely mentally unstable. However, certain components reference information someone could only comprehend following the wall's installation. But with the wall already in place, there was literally no alternative method to access that compartment. It simply makes no sense. My father wouldn't let me retain that box when we relocated. For all I understand, it remains in that attic. This enigma is one I'll transport with me until I breathe my final breath. I've been a cigarette smoker for considerably longer than I'm pleased to acknowledge. 23 years at this point, it's transformed into less of a dependency and more of a ceremonial activity. I absolutely refuse to smoke anywhere inside. I acquired this residence from my parents approximately 4 years past when they relocated to Florida. I inherited this 3-story colonial, and I reside here alone. I've created a routine of taking evening excursions through my backyard while I smoke. It feels meditative. There aren't any residents close enough to create disturbance, and the illumination originates exclusively from my residence. The structure is extraordinarily antiquated, featuring creaking floorboards and drafty openings. Traversing the interior without producing sound is practically unachievable. It additionally features an attic, accessible via a retractable stairway in the upstairs hallway. It's fundamentally a sizable storage compartment. There's additionally a diminutive window up there, providing perspective over the yard. It's roughly 12 inches in measurement, original to the establishment. I've observed that aperture regularly throughout my evening walks. It never garnered particular consideration beforehand. That modification occurred approximately 3 weeks back. I was executing my regular circuit partway through my smoke When I happened to raise my vision toward the residence, my gaze simply oriented upward, and momentarily, I could have sworn I perceived something shifting behind that small aperture. I discontinued my movement and gazed upward toward my residence from the backyard center. The window was pitch black, unsurprisingly. However, I was almost certain I'd perceived activity, possibly a silhouette traversing the surface, or something altering position within the obscurity behind it. I persuaded myself I was overthinking it. I'd presumably observed a reflection from atmospheric conditions or a flying creature passing by. I completed my smoke, went back inside, and disregarded it. The subsequent evening, I witnessed it again. At this moment, I was convinced that something was unquestionably shifting up there. Not merely a reflection or visual deception. Something inhabited my attic. My immediate assumption was that it constituted a creature. Rodents regularly infiltrate aged dwellings. However, I contemplated what category of creature would maintain sufficient proportions to be perceptible from that distance. I went back inside and positioned myself at the lowest point of the staircase. I didn't perceive any gnawing sounds. I detected nothing whatsoever, which was peculiar. I genuinely didn't want to investigate up there, but I possessed no alternative. If something inhabited my attic, I required information. Therefore, reluctantly, I triggered my phone's illumination and retrieved the ceiling stairway. The experience was particularly unnerving because the attic's configuration required me to ascend without vision of what awaited. If something was concealed immediately beyond the opening, I wouldn't be able to observe it. I mounted methodically, attempting to convince myself I wasn't experiencing overwhelming fear. However, I genuinely was, and my anxieties were nearly immediately substantiated. I was absolutely not ready for the sight that confronted me. It wasn't a creature inhabiting my attic. It wasn't a